A very warm welcome to my YouTube this evening. We're taking a look at the Focke Wulf 190, a revolutionary aircraft that came into the skies of South Devon in 1942. It was in a battle with 312 Squadron, the Czech wing that had taken off from RAF Bolthead. The battle ensued over Devon, and then the aircraft pilot, Armin Faber, became disorientated and interestingly ended up landing at RAF Pembrey in South Wales. Sit back, make a cup of tea, have a biscuit or two ready and listen to this interesting story unfold. See you in a bit. Cheers. On June the 23rd, the Luftwaffe officer Faber requested and was granted special permission by his superiors to fly a combat sortie with the FW-190 squadron of 7th Staffel. As soon as permission was given, Faber's unit was scrambled to intercept an RAF squadron of Douglas Boston bombers sent to attack Morlaix. The bomber squadron was accompanied by an escort of Spitfires flown by a Czechoslovakian unit of 312 Squadron, and a raging battle ensued in the sky. In the ensuing fight, Faber and his squadron were able to demonstrate the deadly capabilities of the FW-190 by shooting down 7 of the Spitfires while only losing 2 aircraft in their own unit, one of which crashed in mid-air. However, Faber found himself in the sights of a Spitfire piloted by Czech Sergeant Frank Treitner, who pursued him even after the fight had died down. Faber flew north towards Start Point, Devon, in an attempt to lose him. He performed various acrobatics to shake the Spitfire off, but Treitner remained in determined hot pursuit. Faber finally gained the upper hand with his manoeuvres, flying at Treitner from the direction of the sun and successfully shooting down the Spitfire. Treitner parachuted out with shrapnel wounds, and Faber turned his FW-190 back in the direction of what he assumed was towards northern France, to head back for a hero's welcome. While Faber's evasive flying techniques had scored him a kill, they'd also drained the FW-190's fuel tank and left him catastrophically disorientated. Now 312 Czech Squadron had taken off from RAF Bolthead at Salcombe in South Devon to engage the FW-190s that were coming in to attack the various bomber squadrons that were flying out to the north coast of France. 312 Squadron had in fact headed up towards Exeter to the point where they could engage the FW-190s that were coming in across the English Channel. Now return to Armin Faber, who has engaged 312 Squadron but is also now trying to escape the attack and has become severely disorientated. Instead of flying to the south above the English Channel in the direction of France, he instead turned his plane north over the Bristol Channel and began flying towards southern Wales. With his below, a group of bemused British Air Force personnel were standing in wait as his FW-190 came in with Luftwaffe markings for a landing and taxied to a halt. As Pembrey was a training college and had no weapons on site, the duty pilot Sergeant Jeffries armed himself with a flare gun and ordered the men watching to direct Faber's plane to a nearby holding area. In between times, the Czech Squadron 312 had by this time returned to RAF Bolthead to prepare for their next scramble. Jeffries was waited until Faber had opened the canopy before taking him prisoner. After the excitement of taking part in an aerial battle and finding out that he was a safe spot to land, it was reportedly took Faber a few moments to notice that those greeting him were not fellow Nazi officers in familiar uniforms, but men dressed in blue and talking in a completely different language. By the time his mistake had dawned on him, it was too late to turn the FW-190 around and make for the runway. He had inadvertently helped the British to capture the fighter plane they'd been desperate to get their hands on by delivering it to their doorstep. This was the first working FW-190 fighter to be successfully captured fully intact by the Allies. Faber's FW-190 had its serial number changed from its original German work number 313 to an RAF number MP449, denoting it was an experimental aircraft, and it was repainted in RAF colours. It was initially presented to RAF Group Captain Hugh Williams, who had expertise in flying captured enemy aircraft, with the offer to transport it to a test facility on condition that he did not crash the plane under any circumstances. However, Williams decided that it was not a promise he could make, and crashing or damaging an intact FW-190 was not something he wanted to risk. Instead, the plane was carefully taken apart by mechanics and driven away on a truck. It was first delivered to the Royal Aircraft Establishment facility in Farnborough, where it was meticulously reassembled for initial test flights in July 1942. Now, as it was the Spitfires of 312 Squadron that engaged the Luftwaffe squadron that Armin Faber was flying with in his FW-190, I thought it would be worthwhile to take a trip up to Exeter, because there's some very, very rare colour footage of the Czech squadrons that were operating from RAF Exeter in 1942. Now, although they were based here from May 1942 at RAF Exeter, they also had detachments to RAF Bolt Head and RAF Harrowby. Now, when the Czech squadron arrived at Exeter in the August of 1942, and they carried out offensive sweeps and bomber escort missions, and they were flying the Spitfire 5B and the 5C. And the aircraft code marked NN are that of 310 Squadron, who were operating out of RAF Exeter in 1942, along with 312 Squadron, and their aircraft code was DU, and they were operating out of Harrowby as well. Now, these three Czech squadrons had taken over the role of the Polish Day Fighter Wing from May 1942 until June 1943. They continued convoy patrols and sorties over France, plus hit-and-run attacks on German fighter bombers. And these activities were coordinated from the wing headquarters at RAF Exeter. The squadron commander can be seen here giving a detailed briefing of the possible attack targets in northern France, and the squadron would be taking off, flying across the channel, and having a go at some of these targets on the northern coast of the occupied France. Of course, this was the summer of 1942. And as you can see in the footage, it's very sunny, very dry, and looks very warm, and lots of the work on the aircraft and the preparation is being carried out outside of the briefing huts. And of course, being the summer, the grass is looking slightly brown, but this is actually very rare footage of operations by these Czech squadrons at RAF Exeter in the summer of 1942. I really hope you can enjoy looking at this, because I can assure you it's very rarely seen, as it's so local to us down here in the West Country, to see RAF Exeter in the summer of 1942. It's quite interesting that these Czech squadrons also had detachments down to RAF Bolthead near Salcombe, which is where Peter Pearce, a young lad, lived during the Second World War. And I'm just going to read something that he wrote from his diaries during wartime. We're going back to Salcombe to hear what he has to say as a young lad living in Salcombe. And he says, "Salcombe town throughout the whole of the war years was never bombed by night, but many people will remember hearing odd noises coming from the sky while enemy bombers returned this way from heavy raids on Plymouth, no doubt with bits and pieces falling away from them. The nearest the bombs came to us by night was when a bomber dropped a stick of bombs over Lincoln Farm at 11 p.m. on a moonlit night. It was at a time when they were paying a lot of attention to Plymouth. The siren had sounded, and not long before, the machine guns had been heard in the sky, seemingly not far away. The bombs straddled the farm, but didn't directly hit the house. One bomb exploded between the farm and the boatyard of Chaddlebank, close by. Another, in the orchard, demolished a wall, while another blew a large crater in the garden. The one that did the most damage exploded alongside a cowhouse and demolished it, and it did a lot of damage to some stables. Fortunately, there was no loss of human life that time, but it was indeed a close thing. 10 bullocks were killed, together with a number of small stock. Horses in a stable had a lucky escape, mainly because a beam, which came to rest over the top of them, held up the falling debris long enough to get them out. They were all terribly frightened, of course, and almost uncontrollable. It's understandable that the farmer and his labourers worked through the night with the dead and dying animals all over the place. It must have been so distressing. Sadly, it was a world war, and it knew no limits, day or night. During World War II, the Czech squadrons carried out 17,472 combat sorties, with a total time of 10,364 operating hours. They shot down 14 planes with a certainty, 9 probables and 1 damaged. During this time, they sadly lost 17 pilots, and one of these was British serving with them, and 6 were captured. The first enemy aircraft that was shot down by the trio of Sergeant Josef Stelik, Flight Lieutenant Dennis Gillam, DFC, and Pilot Officer Alois Vasco was in October 1940, and their last operational flight was protecting bombers during the raid on the coastal batteries on the island of Helgoland, and this raid took place on the 19th of April 1945. The 312 Czech Squadron also participate in supporting Jubilee Operation, landing at Dieppe, Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, Market Garden, and an attempt to circumvent the Siegfried Line and Varsity in support of the violent crossing of the Rhine. This squadron was to be the first to fly under the command of Squadron Leader Hugo Herbach, DFC. Now, just in closing, I'll read from the last page of the diary of Josef Janabi, with a note from his friend Wojtek Smalag about his tragic accident. Pilot Officer 2nd Lieutenant Janabi Josef died on the 2nd of May 1942 in a plane he crashed. He used his parachute, but the crash happened at very low altitude, so the parachute could not save him. He was my best friend, and I honour his memory. And in closing, I thought it'd be interesting to just see what happened to Armin Faber after he was captured. He unsuccessfully attempted suicide twice during his imprisonment, and then made 2 unsuccessful attempts at escaping. He was transported to Canada and was imprisoned in a POW camp there. He was subsequently repatriated back to Germany close to the end of the war due to his poor health conditions. Parts of Armin Faber's Focke Wulf 190, including the cockpit and the flight control panel, were displayed at Shoreham Air Museum, along with pieces of Trenton's crashed Spitfire, and in 1991 Armin Faber visited the museum. Hopefully this has all been of some reasonable interest, and in closing I'd just like to thank you for watching along, and please have a ponder about subscribing to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you on the next film. Take the greatest of care and all the very best. Cheers for now.